Hi, my name is Cole. Today I'm going to be talking about Law and Order, Season 1. So, just a little bit of context on the show. This is a procedural police drama. It centers around the detectives who investigate crimes and the district attorneys who prosecute them. The detectives in the show usually take up the first half of an episode as far as the procedure for this show goes. And then the DAs who prosecute the crimes, they usually take up the second half of the episode. There are kind of exceptions throughout the season where DA's section might take up 15 minutes if the investigation takes too long, or in one case, there was just a title card at the end after the investigation that said that the perps were convicted and sentenced to prison. But in general, half and half for investigation and prosecution is the format. The detectives, Mike and Max. Mike is a younger cop. He is single. Max is a slightly older cop with more experience and has a wife and kids at home. They report to Captain Donald Cragen. Cragen sort of has an interesting development that I'll talk about later, but in general, these are completely static characters. They don't develop at all. You don't need to watch any particular episode in any order. I think you could have started halfway through the season, and that would have been as good an introduction as starting at the very first episode. The district attorneys are Ben and Paul. Ben Stone, he's often called Stone, same with Paul Robinette, often called Robinette. These are the folks who are prosecuting the crimes each episode. They usually have back and forth with various judges and defense attorneys through each episode. I think there's, I want to say 4 or 5 different judges. To be quite honest, I forget their names because they kind of rotate out, and they're never really central characters to these episodes. As I stated earlier, the characters are pretty much entirely static. They don't develop. The only changes that happen through each episode is the crimes being committed. I think this is somewhat unique maybe to season 1 of this show. I have watched SVU previously, and that show does kind of have a slow but noticeable development and progression to the characters throughout that show. But in this one, things seem relatively static. This season seemed primarily focused on setting up the procedure and making sure it's kind of airtight and good to go for the rest of the seasons. As far as the appeal of the show over time, I think that its repetition and procedural nature is the appeal of this show. That it can be casual watch, that you can skip episodes, skip weeks of watching, and still get the same enjoyment as a person who watches every episode every week. The cultural impact of the show is quite large. It takes after its predecessor Dragnet in that it wants to depict, being a keyword, depict realistic policing. The show's creator, Dick Wolf, I watched an interview with him where he said that the Bible for Law and Order was the front page of the New York Post. So he really wanted to use real-life crimes, and although it's stated at the end of the episode doesn't depict any particular real crime, it has been said that the basis of inspiration for these episodes is crimes that are committed. The show is an idealized depiction of policing. It has been criticized as propaganda because of the direct involvement with the NYPD in shooting rights and collaboration with props and sets. It's really a very idealized version of policing. There's not a lot of police fallibility that is depicted in the show, and when it is depicted, it's usually shown in a way that's very obvious and kind of lacks nuance. you can kind of see the writers and actors trying on new hats for particular characters throughout the show, kind of maybe trying on different character aspects. Like towards the end of the show, Kragan starts cracking jokes. One missed opportunity with Kragan was in the second episode. He revealed that he previously had troubles with alcohol and is an alcoholic, but it's never really capitalized on the show or taken any further than that. There's also a tendency to depict good and evil as very obvious within the show. The defense attorneys are usually kind of depicted as like conniving or slimy in some sort of way, whereas the district attorneys are usually depicted as having a very strong sense of moral right and moral wrong. Sometimes there are hurdles involving like technicalities or rules of evidence, such as in the Duel episode depicting mafia crime. There is a moment where they discuss double jeopardy, or the idea that you can't be tried twice for the same crime. And when they're trying to get their perpetrator, the detectives find evidence that would have been useful in the previous trial after the fact. And there is extreme frustration kind of around that rule and adhering to that rule. And then in the final episode of this season, even a internal affairs investigation shows two really incompetent internal affairs officers that just kind of get in everyone's way. And the idea of a internal investigation into the police, even though it's ultimately successful, the attitudes around it are that this is unneeded, or this is just a hindrance, this is getting in my way, this is incompetent investigation, which, as depicted in the show, it was. And there's just kind of a general frustration with and wanting to not disregard, but wanting to show dissatisfaction with certain rules or police reforms throughout the show. In general, I'm glad that I watched an entire season of it. For anybody who's wanting to get into the show, I would almost recommend going to a later season and seeing if the characters get a little bit more interesting and less rigid and more developed. But I'm a little over time, and I think that's a good place to end it. Thanks so much.